Welcome back to the Deep Dive. I'm your host, and today we are tackling a figure who is, he's basically a walking, talking paradox.
That's putting it lightly.
We're looking at a man whose life really reads like a collision between a police blotter and a PhD thesis. We're talking about a vagabond, a petty thief, a repeat offender facing a life sentence
Who just becomes this celebrated literary icon of the 20th century without even really changing.
Exactly. That's the thing. There's no redemption arc, is there?
No, not in the traditional sense. Usually you get the story of the criminal who sees the light, and becomes a saint.
Yeah.
But our subject today, Jean Genet, he didn't do that.
Not at all.
He became a saint by, doubling down on being a sinner.
Yes. He's the man who wrote about the dazzling beauty of betrayal, yet he ends his life as this fiercely loyal political ally to marginalized groups.
The Black Panthers, the Palestinians.
It's a messy, complicated, and frankly, it's an explosive stack of sources we have today.
It really is. We're pulling from, several biographies, his own novels, which are incredibly dense, and then historical accounts of his activism from the 40s all the way through the 80s, plus the literary criticism.
Can't forget the heavy hitters.
Oh, yeah, Jean-Paul Sartre especially.
So our mission today is really to unpack this specific question. How did a self-proclaimed criminal child manage to dismantle societal values just by writing about them?
And why does his work still feel so relevant? Why is he still the touchstone for understanding power, masks, the concept of the outsider?
To get there, I think we have to look at the masks he wore.
Absolutely. The thief, the writer, the activist. It's all performance in a way.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for this deep dive. We're going to break his life into 4 distinct phases. Phase 1, the biography of an outcast. You know how a foster kid becomes a career criminal.
And why that was maybe a choice.
Right. Then Phase 2, the literary explosion, him writing these absolute masterpieces from a prison cell.
Which is just an incredible story in itself.
Then Phase 3, the theater of illusion. He moves to the stage, and that's where he really starts to deconstruct power.
Rituals and masks.
And finally, Phase 4, the radical activist. His really surprising turn as a revolutionary figure in the U.S. and the Middle East.
It's a wild trajectory. He goes from solitary confinement to, the absolute center of global politics.
It's an unbelievable life. So let's start at the very beginning. Paris, 1910. Because the circumstances of his birth, really, they set the stage for everything that followed.
They really do. December 19th, 1910, Jean Genet is born. And that theme of rejection is stamped on him, immediately.
How so?
His mother was a prostitute. She keeps him for 7 months, and then she gives him up for adoption. He becomes a ward of the state.
And usually when we hear abandoned child of a prostitute in early 1900s France, we immediately picture this Dickensian nightmare.
Oh, absolutely. Gruel, beatings, sleeping in a coal shed, that whole thing.
Right, the tragic childhood trope. We want to believe that society failed him, so he failed society. It's a neat, clean story.
But the sources, they paint a very different and I think a much more interesting picture. Genet was sent to a provincial town, a place called Ligny-en-Morvan.
Okay.
And his foster family, headed by a carpenter, was, they were fine.
They were better than fine, weren't they? The sources say they were quite good to him.
They were, by all accounts. And his main biographer, Edmund White, confirms this. They were loving and attentive. This wasn't a house of horrors. And not only that, Genet was a star pupil.
He got excellent grades.
Excellent grades. He was the altar boy. He was smart. He was supported. He was, religious. The opposite of the cliche.
This is the part I find so fascinating. If you have a loving home and you're getting straight A's, where does the thief come from? Why turn to crime?
That is the million-dollar psychological question, isn't it? Because despite all that support, he started running away. He started stealing.
Small things at first.
Yeah, petty theft. Money from the house, items from local shops. And there's a strong argument to be made here that this was an existential choice.
An existential choice. What do you mean by that? He decided to be bad.
In a way, yeah. Think about it. He knows he's a foundling. He knows his birth mother abandoned him. He feels that at his core, by birth, he is already outside the social order.
Okay, so he's already marked.
He's already marked. So if society says, be good, and you feel society's already rejected you, compliance just feels fake, But if you choose evil, if you choose to be the thief, you're taking control. You're not just a victim of abandonment anymore. You're the active villain in your own story.
That is such a powerful reframe. It's almost like he's saying, you didn't cast me out, I walked out first.
Precisely. He's taking ownership of his narrative.
Yeah.
And boy, did he commit to it. By age 15, after repeated acts of vagrancy and misdemeanors, the system had finally had enough.
And that's when he's sent to
Mettray Penal Colony.
The name even sounds heavy. This wasn't just a juvenile hall, was it?
No. Mettray was infamous. It was a legendarily harsh place. He was there from 1926 to 1929, so for nearly 3 years.
What was it like?
It was a brutal military-style institution. Hard labor, really strict discipline. But, and here is that paradox again, for Genet, this wasn't just a prison. It was a university.
The University of Chrono.
University of Identity. This period is so crucial. It forms the entire basis of his later novel, Miracle of the Rose. He didn't look back on Mettray with horror. He mythologized it.
He romanticized it.
Completely. He saw the hierarchy of the tough, older inmates and the younger, weaker ones as a sort of royal court. He transformed the squalor and the violence into a hierarchy of saints and sinners.
So he's, 15, 16 years old, locked up in this terrible place, and instead of being broken by the experience, he's actively world building. He's turning the bullies into kings.
It cemented his identity as a prisoner.
Wow.
He realized that this dark underworld had its own codes, its own beauty, its own aesthetic, and he wanted to be a part of it. He wanted to understand it.
So he gets out at 18. He's young. He has a record. What's the next move for someone like that?
Well, he tries to escape the penal system by joining the ultimate institution for lost souls.
Let me guess. The Foreign Legion.
The French Foreign Legion.
The classic run away and join the army move. How did that work out for a guy who clearly hates authority?
About as well as you'd expect. He joined at 18, but it didn't last long. He was eventually given a dishonorable discharge.
For what?
The official reason was indecency. He was caught engaged in a homosexual act with another soldier.
Okay, so let's just recap here. He's maybe 18 or 19 years old. He has no family. He's a convicted juvenile delinquent. And now he's been kicked out of the army for being gay in the 1930s. He is like 0 for 3 on the social acceptance scoreboard.
And this is what kicks off what we can call the vagabond era. For the next several years, he just wanders across Europe.
Where to go?
Spain, Italy, Poland, Czechoslovakia, all over. He's living the life of a drifter. He's a petty thief, he's a prostitute, he's a beggar. He's using false papers to cross borders.
It sounds kind of adventurous in a movie sort of way, but the reality must have been incredibly grim. Just cold, hungry, constantly looking over your shoulder.
It was absolutely grueling. But again, with Genet, he isn't just suffering through this, he's observing it. He's taking notes. These experiences became the raw material for the Thief's Journal, which he published in 1949.
And in that book, he recounts this life of wandering, not with shame, but with pride.
With a kind of sacred pride.
And that's a key distinction I really want to drill into. Most people, if they lived that life selling their body for a sandwich, stealing from churches, they would either hide it or they would write a misery memoir.
Look how terrible my life was. Please pity me.
Right. Genet does the absolute opposite.
He refuses your pity. He wants your envy, or at least your awe. He actively mythologized his own degradation. He took the mud of his life, the theft, the prostitution, the lice-infested cells, and he sculpted it into something he considered beautiful. He calls it the splendor of the outcast.
Which brings us perfectly into phase 2, the literary explosion. He returns to Paris in 1937, and he's stuck in this revolving door of prison.
Right. He's in and out constantly. Theft, false papers, lewd acts. He's a known nuisance to the Paris police at this point.
But during one of these stints in prison, I believe it was Fresnay prison, something shifts. He doesn't just sit there and do his time, he starts writing.
The creative spark ignites. It's an amazing moment. He writes his first poem, Le Condamné à Mort, the man sentenced to death.
Yeah.
And get this detail. He believed in it so much that he had it printed at his own cost.
While in prison.
While he was a penniless thief. He somehow finds the money to print his own poetry.
That is some serious dedication. He's betting on himself.
And then comes the big one. The novel, Our Lady of the Flowers, written in prison in 1944.
I've read excerpts of this. Intense is not the word. It's not a standard linear story at all. It feels more like a fever dream.
That's a great way to put it. It's a journey through the prison underworld, but it's filtered through this incredibly poetic, almost hallucinatory lens.
And it has this fictional alter ego, right?
Yeah.
Divine.
Yes, Divine. And Divine is surrounded by these characters, other prisoners, drag queens, pimps, with names that are just fantastic.
Give you some examples.
Most of the first, most of the second, First Communion, and my favorite, the Queen of Romania.
The Queen of Romania. You have to love the campiness of it.
It is camp, but it's gritty camp. It explores the specificity of homosexual gestures, the secret coding of that subculture, and the brutal hierarchy of the prison. He's describing a world that 99% of the reading public knew nothing about.
And he's describing it with the language of a cathedral.
Precisely. The language of sainthood and martyrdom.
So he's writing these masterpieces on, what, brown paper bags or whatever scraps he can find in jail. How does it get out? How does the sophisticated Parisian literary world find out about this, for lack of a better term, dirtbag genius?
He sought out Jean Cocteau.
The Jean Cocteau, the
Yeah.
famous filmmaker, poet, the darling of the avant-garde.
Very same. Genet somehow managed to get his work to Cocteau, and Cocteau was just blown away.
He saw it right away.
Immediately. He recognized that this wasn't just prison scribbles. This was high art. This was something new. So Cocteau used his massive network of contacts to get the novel published.
So he has a champion, a very powerful champion. But there is a ticking clock here, right? Genet is still committing crimes he hasn't stopped.
Exactly. The writing doesn't stop the thieving. By 1949, Genet had accumulated 10 convictions. And under an old French law at the time, once you hit that 10th conviction, you were automatically facing a life sentence of preventive detention.
A life sentence. It's basically 3 strikes and you're out, but for France.
Right. So the literary career he just started was about to be conducted entirely from a cell, forever. But then this rescue mission happened. And this is honestly one of the most remarkable moments in all of literary history.
A group of prominent figures got together.
A supergroup. Jean Cocteau, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Pablo Picasso.
Just pause on those names. Sartre, Cocteau, Picasso. That is the Mount Rushmore of European culture at the time.
You couldn't assemble a more powerful cultural team. And they petitioned the President of the Republic to set aside the sentence.
And what was their argument?
They argued that Genet's talent was so significant, so important to French culture, that he should be pardoned, that his art transcended his crimes.
Imagine that happening today. Yes, Mr. President, this man is a habitual thief, but have you read his prose? It's magnificent.
It really speaks to the immense power of the intellectual class in France at that time. And it worked.
It worked.
The president granted the pardon. Jean Genet never returned to prison after that moment.
He's free. The thief is now a celebrated author. So let's talk about the content of these books that saved his life. We mentioned Our Lady of the Flowers, but there's also Funeral Rites and Querelle of Brest. Funeral Rites seems particularly shocking even for him.
Funeral Rites is a tough read for many people. It was written for his lover, Jean de Carnon, who was a resistance fighter killed by the Germans in World War II.
So on the surface, it's a tragic love story, a tribute.
Well, it's Genet, so it's never that simple. He grieves for his lover, yes. But the book explores love and betrayal across political divides in a way that is just jarring.
He writes about the enemy with a strange kind of erotic charge.
He does. And we have to address the elephant in the room here, Genet's relationship with France and with the Nazis.
Right. I saw in the notes that later in life he admitted to something pretty damning.
He did. In a BBC interview in 1985, just a year before he died, he admitted that during the occupation of Paris, he was happy to see the French army defeated. He said he supported the Nazis when they invaded.
Whoa, okay. We need to parse this very carefully. Was he a fascist? Did he believe in the master race ideology?
Most scholars and the evidence in his work would say no, not ideologically. It wasn't about anti-Semitism or Aryan supremacy for him.
What was it about?
It was about his hatred of the French state. Remember, the French state was the entity that took him from his mother, put him in maître, and threw him in prison repeatedly. So for him, he operated on the principle that the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Even if that enemy was the Third Reich.
Even then, it's an extreme, almost pathological contrarianism.
And that's the tension in Funeral Rites.
Exactly. He elevates violent criminals, even Nazi collaborators, to the status of icons, of saints. He celebrates beauty in evil. He forces you, the reader, to confront your own morality. He's asking, if I can write a sentence so beautiful that it makes you admire a monster, even for a second, what does that say about you? What does that say about art?
It's a trap. He's trapping the reader in their own aesthetic appreciation. He's showing you that your sense of beauty can be weaponized against your sense of morality.
Precisely. He's showing that beauty and morality are not synonyms. They are often at war with each other.
So he becomes the bad boy of French literature. He's famous, he's free, and then something incredibly ironic happens. He gets Sartred.
Ah, yes, the Sartre effect. In 1952, Jean-Paul Sartre, who was then the high priest of existentialism, wrote a massive analysis of Genet.
It was called Saint Genet.
Saint Genet. It sounds like a canonization, and in a way it was.
How long was this book?
It was a 600-page philosophical tome. I mean, huge. Sartre analyzes Genet's every move, every word. He explains Genet's existential development from vagrant to writer. He basically takes Genet apart like a clock to show the world how he works.
And how did Genet take that? I can't imagine having a genius explain you to yourself is a comfortable experience.
He hated it. Or maybe it's more accurate to say it paralyzed him. He was so deeply affected by being explained, by being turned into a philosophical object, a case study, that he got severe writer's block.
He stopped writing.
He didn't write fiction for the next 5 years.
That is the ultimate irony, isn't it? Sartre helps save him from a literal prison, but then imprisons him in a book.
Genet himself said he felt stripped naked. He felt like he had been buried by Sartre. Once the mystery of the artist is dissected and explained, can you still create the illusion? He didn't think so for a while.
So he goes quiet, but he doesn't stay quiet forever. When he comes back, he shifts gears entirely. He moves from novels to the stage. This brings us to phase 3, the theater of illusion.
Right. And if the novels were about excavating his own past, the plays were about the structures of power itself. He became obsessed with ritual, with mirrors, with masks.
Let's talk about The Maids. This is one of his most famous plays, and he actually wrote it earlier in 1947, but it really gained traction later.
The Maids is a perfect example of this. It's an intense study in role play and identity. You have two maids, Solange and Claire, and when their mistress is away, they perform this elaborate ritual.
What do?
They take turns playing the mistress and the maid. They wear her clothes, they imitate her voice, they abuse each other in character, they fantasize about killing the real mistress.
So it's like Downton Abbey on a heavy dose of acid.
That's one way to put it. It's all about social identity. Who are you when you're wearing the uniform versus when you take it off? Is the mistress only powerful because the maids agree to play the role of the oppressed? It's about the performance of class.
And then he follows that up with The Balcony in 1957. This one sounds even more trippy.
The Balcony is a masterpiece of the absurd, and it's so politically sharp. It's set in a brothel. There's not a normal brothel.
How so?
It's a house of illusions.
All right.
Clients don't come there for sex in the usual way. They come there to simulate roles of power.
So you go there to pretend to be important.
Exactly. A gas man comes to pretend he's a bishop. He wears the robes. He hears confessions. He forgives sins.
Probably another
man comes to be a judge, a general. They're surrounded by mirrors, and they essentially rent authority by the hour.
That feels incredibly relevant to this social media age, doesn't it? Curating an avatar of who you want to be.
It's extremely prescient. But here's the brilliant twist in the play. Outside the brothel, a real revolution is happening. The regime falls. The real bishop, the real judge, and the real general are all killed or have fled.
So there's a power vacuum.
Total power vacuum. So the chief of police comes to the brothel and begs the clients, the fake bishop, the fake judge, to go out onto the balcony and face the crowd. They have to become the figures they were only pretending to be in order to save the system.
That is brilliant. It completely blurs the line between fantasy and political reality. It suggests that power is just a costume that anyone can wear.
Genet is saying that all authority is a performance. If you wear the robe and speak the lines convincingly enough, the crowd will bow.
And then we get to The Blacks in 1958. Now, this sounds like his most direct and maybe most controversial work regarding race.
It is. It's a critical dramatization of negritude, which was the Black identity movement. The play presents a group of Black actors who are performing a ritualistic murder of a white woman. And they're doing this before a court of white authority figures.
Okay.
But, and here's the classic Genet twist, the white court is played by Black actors wearing white masks.
So there are no white actors on stage?
None. It's layers upon layers of performance.
Yeah.
He's exploring the mask that Black people were forced to wear in a white-dominated society, but he's also deconstructing it from the inside. He wasn't trying to speak for Black people so much as he was exposing the complete absurdity of the racial hierarchy itself.
And I read that the production history of this was huge in New York. This wasn't some obscure art house play.
It was massive. The 1961 New York production ran for 1,408 performances. It was the longest-running off-Broadway non-musical of the entire decade. And the cast, my God, the cast.
Who was in it?
James Earl Jones, Louis Gossett Jr., Cicely Tyson, Maya Angelou, Charles Gordon.
That is a Hall of Fame lineup. That's unbelievable.
It was a powerhouse production, and it shows that Genet's work, despite being very French and very avant-garde, resonated so deeply with the American civil rights struggle.
Yeah.
They saw their own fight reflected in his Hall of Mirrors.
Which leads us perfectly into Phase 4. Because Genet didn't just write about these struggles from a cafe in Paris, he actually went to the front lines. This is the part of the story that always surprises people. The radical activists.
The shift really happens after May 1968, the student uprisings in Paris. Genet, who had been relatively quiet for a while, suddenly woke up politically.
He felt the energy of the moment.
He did. He started with an homage to Daniel Cohn-Bendit, the student leader. He started looking at the terrible living conditions of immigrants in France. And then in 1970, he gets this really unexpected invitation.
From the Black Panthers.
From the Black Panthers, yes. The revolutionary Black Power organization in the U.S. invited this elderly, white, French, gay writer to come and visit them.
And he went.
He didn't just go for a photo op. He stayed for 3 months. He toured the United States. He gave lectures at universities to raise money for their legal defense funds. He attended the trial of Huey Newton. He wrote articles for their journals like Here and Now for Bobby Seale. He was all in.
I have to ask about the logistics here. He's a convicted criminal in France. The U.S. in 1970 wasn't exactly handing out visas to radical ex-cons who wanted to hang out with the Black Panthers.
Oh, he was absolutely refused a visa. He had been expelled or refused entry back in 1968. So in 1970, he just ignored it.
What do you mean he ignored it?
He flew to Canada and crossed the border illegally.
That is so perfectly Genet. The law says no, I'll just find a back door. It's the thief's mentality applied to international travel.
It's exactly that. And he felt this incredibly deep solidarity with the Panthers. He saw the police brutality against Black Americans and recognized the exact same machinery of repression that he had faced as a poor youth in France. He wrote very bluntly about it. He said, "The Americans kill off Blacks." He saw it as a systemic extermination.
And his activism didn't stop in the U.S. After this, he went to the Middle East.
Later in that same year, 1970, he went to Jordan. And he spent 6 months living in Palestinian refugee camps.
6 months, not just a visit. He was living there, sleeping in tents.
Living with the Fedayeen, the fighters, learning their struggle from the inside. He even secretly met Yasser Arafat near Amman. He was totally immersed in that world.
What was he looking for there? Was this just some kind of radical tourism?
I don't think so. I really think he was looking for a new kind of outcast community. In the refugee camps, he found a people who were displaced, who were rejected by the world, living on the margins, just like the prisoners he used to live with.
But with a key difference.
A key difference. Unlike the prisoners, these people had a collective political purpose. They weren't just individuals surviving. They were a nation fighting for a homeland.
And this commitment, it lasted until the end of his life, right? He was in Beirut in 1982 during a truly horrific event.
September 1982. The Sabra and Shatila massacre. The Falangist militia, while the area was under Israeli control, massacred hundreds, perhaps thousands, of Palestinian and Lebanese Shiite civilians in the refugee camps.
And Genet was in Beirut when this happened.
He was in the city, and he was one of the very first Westerners to enter the camp after the killing stopped.
My God, that must have been a vision of hell.
He described it that way.
Oh.
Walking through streets piled with bodies.
Yeah.
Swollen corpses, flies everywhere, the smell. And he did what he does best. He bore witness. He wrote an essay called 4 Hours in Shatila.
And it's not journalism.
It's not standard journalism at all. It's a poetic witnessing of horror. He describes the strange, almost theatrical positioning of the bodies, the smells, the textures of death. He forces you to look at the decay, at the abject.
It's almost like his entire life, his entire artistic project prepared him for that moment. He had spent decades finding the humanity or the beauty in the abject, in the dark corners of life. And now he was applying that same unflinching gaze to a war crime.
I think that's exactly right. He later read this text at a public event in Vienna in 1983. It was one of his last major public appearances.
And all of this culminated in his final book, right? Prisoner of Love.
Published posthumously in 1986. Prisoner of Love is a memoir, but it has this very different documentary tone. It chronicles his time with both the Panthers and the Palestinians. He wasn't inventing Divine or the Queen of Romania anymore. He was documenting the real-life saints of the revolution as he saw them.
We should also mention he kept up the fight in Europe, too. He supported Angela Davis, wrote the intro to George Jackson's prison letters, Soledad Brother.
And back in France, he worked with Michel Foucault and Sartre to protest police brutality against Algerians. This was deeply personal for him. He remembered the 1961 Paris massacre, where Algerian protesters were beaten by police and their bodies thrown into the Seine River. Genet never forgot that kind of state violence.
He even expressed solidarity with the Baader-Meinhof group, the Red Army faction in Germany, in 1977.
Which again shows his consistency, as unsettling as it can be. If the state called them terrorists, Genet was immediately interested. He wrote an article called Violence and Brutality, arguing that the violence of the revolutionary is always a response to the pre-existing brutality of the state.
Okay, let's move into our final section, what we can call controversy, cinema, and pop culture. Because Genet didn't just exist in highbrow literature and radical politics. He bled into the cool factor of pop culture.
Absolutely. And we have to start with his own film, A Chant d'amour, A Song of Love, which he directed in 1950.
I've heard of this. It was banned for decades, wasn't it?
For a very long time. It's a 26-minute black and white silent film. It depicts two male prisoners in adjacent cells. They can't see each other, but they find ways to communicate. They share cigarette smoke through a straw pushed through a hole in the wall. They swing a garland of flowers on a string between their barred windows. It's incredibly erotic, very explicit for its time, and stylistically just gorgeous.
It sounds like a music video before music videos even existed.
It totally does. And it influenced a huge amount of queer cinema. Later, you have great directors adapting his work. Rainer Werner Fassbinder's final film was Querelle, based on Genet's book Querelle of Brest. And Todd Haynes' first feature, Poison, from 1991, is deeply based on Genet's writings.
And speaking of music, we have to talk about David Bowie.
It's a Jean Genet.
I honestly never made the connection until I read these notes. Jean Genet? Jean Genet? It's so obvious now that you see it.
Bowie confirmed it himself in his book Moonish Daydream. He called it a clumsy pun on Jean Genet. He was absolutely channeling that same androgynous pretty boy criminal energy.
And it didn't stop there. The Libertines, Pete Doherty, that whole mid-2000s indie sleaze aesthetic.
Oh, totally. Pete Doherty cites Genet as a main influence. He references Miracle of the Rose directly in his lyrics. The cover of his collected journals is even inspired by the first edition of Our Lady of the Flowers. That whole romanticized, poetic, junkie/criminal aesthetic is pure Genet.
Even Dire Straits referenced him in their song Less Boys. He really became a symbol, a kind of shorthand for gritty, intellectual rebellion.
He was the patron saint of the bad boy artist, the ultimate outlaw.
Before we wrap up with his death and legacy, we have to touch on that BBC interview one last time, the one from 1985 with Nigel Williams.
It's a fascinating watch. It was just a year before his death, and he's so combative. He completely refuses to play the role of the nice old writer looking back on his life.
He compared the interview itself to a police interrogation.
He did. He was provocative, difficult, and brilliant to the very end.
So how does the story end for him?
Well, Genet developed throat cancer. He was quite ill, and he was found dead on April 15th, 1986.
Where? In a hospital. A nice chateau in the countryside.
No, at Jack's Hotel in Paris. A modest, simple one-star hotel near the Gare de Lyon.
There is something so poetic and fitting about that. He started his adult life as a vagabond, and he died in a transient hotel room.
It seems he fell during the night and hit his head, which was likely the fatal injury. And the hotel, to this day, still keeps his photograph and books there as a small shrine.
And his burial. Did France finally claim him for the Pantheon alongside their other literary giants?
Not a chance. This is his final act of rejection. He is buried in the La Roche Christian Cemetery in Morocco.
Facing the sea.
In a land that was once a French colony, surrounded by the marginalized people he spent his later years supporting. It was the only fitting resting place for a man who never felt at home in France.
So let's try to land the plane here. We've covered the crimes, the books, the plays, the Panthers, the camps. What does it all mean? Why does Jean Genet still matter today?
I think Genet matters because he forces us to confront the other. Not just the concept of it, but the reality of it. He doesn't just ask us to tolerate the outcast. He asks us to admire them, to find the sacred in them.
He completely challenges the foundation of our moral compass.
Completely. He suggests that in betrayal, in crime, in the absolute refusal to conform, there is a kind of holiness. Now, you don't have to agree with him. In fact, his statements about the Nazis make it very hard to agree with him wholesale. But you cannot ignore the mirror he holds up to society.
He shows us that the people we lock away have voices.
And that sometimes those voices are more eloquent, more profound, and more beautiful than our own.
That's a powerful takeaway. He finds the saint in the sinner.
And just as importantly, the sinner in the saint.
I want to leave our listeners with one final provocative thought to chew on. You mentioned his essay on the sculptor Alberto Giacometti. And there's this incredible quote from Genet about Giacometti's thin, spectral statues. He said, they should be offered to the dead and that they should be buried.
It's such a haunting idea. Art that isn't for the living, but for the dead. Kind of funerary offering.
It makes me wonder about Genet's own work. Was he really writing for us, the living audience in the bookshops and theaters, or was he creating these monuments, these novels, these plays, to be buried alongside his own dead? Was funeral rites really for us, or was it a grave good for his lover, Jean de Carnon? Were all his books just monuments to the ghosts of Maitreyi?
That is a beautiful and provocative thought. Perhaps we are just grave robbers reading texts that were meant for the ghosts.
Something to mull over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the complex, contradictory, and brilliant life of Jean Genet.
My pleasure. It was a fascinating journey.
And to our listeners, keep reading, keep questioning, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.